The first thing inmates learn at Rikers Island is that hunger is not an accident. It is part of the system. Inside the Kross Center, the largest jail facility on the island, food is more than sustenance. It is leverage. It is currency. It is power. And on this day, inside the mess hall, it is the fuse to something violent. The mess hall sits at the center of the housing complex like a factory floor, wide, concrete, fluorescent lit, and permanently echoing. Long steel tables are bolted to the ground. Plastic trays slide across metal rails. The air carries the smell of steam, bleach, and overcooked starch. There are no windows. No clocks. Just movement, noise, and routine. Meals at Rikers are not moments of relief. They are controlled operations. Inmates enter in lines, under watch, hands behind backs, eyes forward. Correction officers stand elevated on platforms, radios clipped to their shoulders, scanning faces instead of trays. The portions are small. The food is repetitive. Calories are counted down to the cent, not up to the need. Former inmates have described it the same way, year after year, you are always hungry. Breakfast disappears in minutes. Lunch barely registers. Dinner is survival math. And hunger changes behavior. In the weeks leading up to this incident, tension inside the Kross Center had been building quietly. Food complaints were routine, but this time they were louder. Trays arriving half-filled. Proteins missing. Milk cartons replaced with water. Men who depended on the chow hall because they had no commissary funds were the first to feel it. Commissary separates inmates into classes. Those with money buy ramen, tuna packs, candy, coffee. Those without wait for the next meal and count every bite. In this environment, food becomes status. Control of food becomes dominance. Inside the mess hall, certain inmates position themselves strategically. Near the tray return. Close to the serving line. Watching who ate fast, who saved food, who looked weak. It was subtle. It always is. The correction officers knew the mess hall was volatile. Internal reports had flagged it repeatedly as a flashpoint for violence. But staffing was thin. Experience was thinner. Many officers were new. Many were tired. The priority was movement, not intervention. On this particular day, the line moved slower than usual. Trays clattered. Inmates shuffled forward. The menu was the same bland rotation: processed meat, starch, something green that barely qualified as a vegetable. Portions were inconsistent. Some trays were full. Others were not. No explanation was given. Whispers started first. A look. A stare. A muttered accusation that someone had taken extra. That someone had leverage with the kitchen. That someone was eating better than the rest. In this place, accusations do not need proof. Perception is enough. One inmate, hardened, tattooed, thin from months of inadequate meals, stood out of line for a moment, scanning the room. His eyes locked onto another man seated at a table near the center. That man had commissary. Everyone knew it. He ate differently. He moved differently. He didn't rush his food. The imbalance was visible. Correction officers barked orders to keep the line moving. Trays slapped onto tables. Plastic utensils bent under pressure. The noise rose, but the tension was quieter now, concentrated, directional. This was not a random day. In the Kross Center, food disputes had already led to documented assaults, broken jaws, stabbings with improvised weapons made from trays and cutlery. The Department of Justice would later describe the facility as one where basic needs were routinely weaponized. But inside the mess hall, in this moment, there were no reports yet. No alarms. No violence on paper. Just hunger. Just eyes watching hands. Just the understanding that if you let yourself be seen as weak here, you pay for it later. As the last inmate sat down, the room settled into a low, dangerous hum. Correction officers took positions near the exits. Cameras rolled silently overhead, capturing everything and stopping nothing. The inmate who had paused in line finally sat, his tray lighter than it should have been. He stared at it for a long second. Then he looked up again, across the room, toward the man still eating calmly. This was how it always began at Rikers. Not with shouting. Not with weapons. But with food. And a decision made in silence. Inside the Anna M. Kross Center, food does not belong to everyone equally. By the time an inmate reaches the mess hall, the hierarchy has already been established long before the tray is placed in his hands. Hunger exposes position. It separates those who can supplement the system from those trapped inside it. At Rikers Island, commissary is the dividing line. Money on the outside means calories on the inside. Ramen noodles, peanut butter, tuna packets, chips, instant coffee, these items carry more weight than cigarettes ever did. They are traded, hoarded, extorted, and protected. And those without commissary learn quickly where they stand. The inmate who would later become the victim of this assault was not powerless, but he was visible. Mid-level. Known. He had access to food beyond the tray, and he did not hide it. He ate slowly. He ate fully. He did not rush the way hungry men do. That alone was enough. Across the mess hall sat another inmate, older, leaner, marked by years of institutional living. His arms were inked with faded tattoos that told their own timeline. His face carried the permanent tension of someone who never relaxed. He had no commissary. No outside support. No buffer against the food deficit. At Rikers, that combination is dangerous. Correction officers are trained to watch hands and faces, but not dynamics. They monitor for overt threats, not social gravity. But inside the inmate population, power is constantly assessed. Who can afford to eat? Who cannot? Who controls access? Who can be pressured? Food-related violence rarely begins as rage. It begins as calculation. In the weeks prior, informal food taxes had begun circulating in the housing unit. A soup packet here. A piece of bread there. Nothing overt. Nothing reportable. Just quiet pressure. Men with commissary were expected to share, or pay, if they wanted peace. Refusal did not always mean violence. But it always meant attention. The mess hall was where that attention focused. The inmate with commissary had already drawn notice before this day. He was known to keep food items in his locker. He ate regularly. He did not appear weakened by the shrinking portions. And in a place where hunger sharpened every interaction, that difference became an insult. For the inmate without commissary, watching another man eat well was not just envy. It was survival math. Every tray that came light felt personal. Every missing portion felt stolen. Even when it wasn't. Inside Rikers, rumors move faster than facts. Someone in the kitchen is skimming. Someone is cutting deals. Someone is eating more than they should. The truth matters less than belief. And belief spreads across tables in silence. Correction officers noticed nothing unusual that day. No raised voices. No arguments. No contraband in sight. From the outside, it looked like routine. But routine at Rikers is deceptive. Violence here does not announce itself early. The inmate without commissary began adjusting his position in the mess hall over several days. Sitting closer. Watching longer. Memorizing habits. The way the other man held his tray. Where he sat. Who sat near him. This was not impulsive behavior. This was institutional adaptation. At Rikers Island, food disputes have been cited repeatedly in civil lawsuits and federal investigations. Inmates have described being assaulted for refusing to hand over bread, milk cartons, or commissary items. The Anna M. Kross Center, in particular, has been flagged for chaotic supervision during meals. And chaos creates opportunity. On this day, the inmate with commissary finished eating last. He lingered. That was a mistake. Lingering signals comfort. Comfort signals excess. Excess signals vulnerability. The inmate without commissary did not move yet. He waited. Hunger had taught him patience. Around them, the mess hall began to thin. Trays stacked. Chairs scraped. Correction officers shifted positions, preparing for movement back to housing units. This transition period was always the most dangerous. Attention drifted. Structure loosened. This was when lines blurred. In the mess hall, proximity is power. Distance invites witnesses. The inmate without commissary stood slowly, tray empty, movements controlled. He moved closer, not aggressively, not obviously. Just close enough to be present. Still no words. Still no confrontation. At Rikers, violence often arrives without warning because it does not require negotiation. The grievance has already been processed internally. The justification already written. Food was the trigger. But it was not the only factor. Respect. Control. Survival. Correction officers would later state they saw the two men near each other moments before the incident. They would say there was no prior argument. No warning signs. That assessment would be technically accurate, and completely incomplete. Because the warning signs were not verbal. They were nutritional. They were structural. They were systemic. And they were seated at the same table. Violence at Rikers Island rarely announces itself. There is no shouting beforehand. No dramatic confrontation. What happens instead is a shift, subtle, almost imperceptible, where routine breaks just enough for something else to enter. Inside the Anna M. Kross Center mess hall, that shift began when the noise level dropped. Mealtime was ending. Trays were being returned. Chairs scraped against concrete. Correction officers were already preparing for the next movement, mentally stepping ahead of the room instead of staying inside it. This was the most dangerous moment. The inmate with commissary stood first. His tray was empty, wiped clean. He stretched slightly, a small release of comfort. He did not scan the room. He did not rush. He moved the way someone moves when they are not afraid of being noticed. Across the table, the other inmate watched. He had finished eating minutes earlier. His tray had been lighter. He had counted every bite without meaning to. Hunger sharpened his awareness, slowed his breathing, narrowed his focus. He stood as well, but later. Deliberately. At this point, no one had said a word. The mess hall's layout worked against safety. Long tables created blind corridors. Concrete pillars blocked clean sight lines. The overhead cameras captured everything but explained nothing. Correction officers were positioned near exits, not between inmates. Distance collapsed quickly. The inmate without commissary moved closer under the pretense of returning his tray. He closed the gap to less than an arm's length. From the outside, it looked incidental, two men navigating a crowded space. From the inside, it was intentional. The first contact was not violent. It was a bump. A shoulder brushing another shoulder. Barely enough to notice. But enough to signal presence. Enough to demand recognition. The inmate with commissary turned his head slightly. Not fully. Just enough to acknowledge someone was there. That was the opening. Words were exchanged quietly. Too quietly for officers to hear. Not insults. Not threats. Statements. Accusations wrapped in calm tones. Questions that weren't questions at all. You eating good? It wasn't a comment. It was a charge. The inmate with commissary responded without thinking. He shrugged. He said something dismissive. Something small. Something that would have meant nothing outside these walls. Inside Rikers, it meant everything. The inmate without commissary stepped closer again. Personal space disappeared. The air between them tightened. Other inmates sensed it and began to shift away, not running, not reacting, just creating room. Experience had taught them what this posture meant. Correction officers still did not intervene. They saw two inmates talking. That was not a violation. The second contact was deliberate. A hand pressed briefly against the other man's tray as it was being stacked. Not aggressive. Not yet. Just intrusive. A reminder of control. The inmate with commissary pulled his tray back instinctively. That reflex sealed it. In a facility where food scarcity ruled behavior, pulling back was interpreted as refusal. Refusal was interpreted as disrespect. And disrespect, in this context, required correction. The inmate without commissary moved first. Not with a punch. Not with a swing. But with speed. A sharpened piece of plastic, fashioned from a tray fragment, concealed in his clothing, came into play in a single motion. It was not dramatic. It was efficient. Close range. Silent. The first strike landed before anyone fully understood what was happening. The inmate with commissary staggered back, more surprised than hurt at first. Confusion crossed his face. His hand went instinctively to his torso. Only then did he realize something was wrong. Blood did not spray. This was not cinematic. It was controlled, targeted, and terrifyingly quiet. Other inmates backed away immediately. Chairs tipped. A path cleared in seconds. No one shouted. No one tried to help. Survival dictated distance. The attacker did not chase. He did not need to. The message had been delivered. Correction officers reacted late, but not unusually late for Rikers. A shout went up. Radios crackled. Commands were issued all at once, overlapping and unclear. The attacker stepped back, dropped the improvised weapon to the floor, and raised his hands. This was not surrender. This was completion. The victim collapsed against the edge of a table, breathing hard, eyes wide, trying to stay upright. An officer reached him seconds later, pushing him down gently, calling for medical assistance. The mess hall was now fully silent. Inmates stood frozen along the walls, hands visible, faces blank. Everyone knew the protocol. Everyone had seen this before, even if they had never been involved. The attacker was restrained quickly. No resistance. No struggle. He stared straight ahead as cuffs were applied. His breathing was steady. His expression unreadable. He had not acted out of impulse. He had acted out of hunger. Medical staff arrived within minutes. The injured inmate was stabilized on site before being moved. His injuries were serious but survivable. That distinction mattered, to the system, if not to the men who watched it happen. The mess hall was cleared. Locked down. Photographed. Documented. On paper, it would read as a sudden assault. In reality, it had been building for weeks. Food shortages. Unequal access. Inconsistent portions. A system where calories equaled status. Where hunger stripped away patience and replaced it with calculation. Correction officers filed reports noting the lack of prior warning signs. No argument. No visible escalation. That assessment would stand. But it ignored the truth everyone inside already understood. At Rikers Island, violence does not start with weapons. It starts with trays. And it ends when the room goes quiet. The violence ended quickly. The consequences did not. Once the injured inmate was removed from the Kross Center mess hall, the space transformed from a cafeteria into a controlled crime scene. The shift was immediate and mechanical, driven by protocol rather than concern. Correction officers ordered all remaining inmates to face the wall. Hands visible. Feet apart. No talking. No movement. The commands echoed off concrete and steel, stripped of emotion, delivered with urgency but not panic. At Rikers Island, lockdown is not a reaction. It is a reflex. The mess hall doors were sealed. Entry and exit points were secured. Radios crackled continuously as supervisors were notified and movement across the housing complex was frozen. What had begun as a food-related assault now triggered a facility-wide response. For the inmates still inside the room, time stretched unnaturally. They stood in silence, staring at scuffed concrete walls stained by decades of institutional wear. No one asked questions. No one looked around. Experience had taught them that curiosity only invited trouble. Fear, here, was quiet and controlled. The injured inmate's blood had already been cleaned before most men were moved. Not out of respect, but out of routine. The facility could not afford visible evidence. Clean floors suggested control. Control suggested order. Medical staff documented injuries quickly and moved on. The man would survive, but survival inside Rikers came with a cost. Victims were not protected. They were relocated. Sometimes punished. Sometimes isolated, for their own safety. Protection was never guaranteed. The attacker was escorted out separately, surrounded by officers. His head remained forward. His posture unchanged. He did not look back at the mess hall. He had already detached from the space. Whatever consequences waited, segregation, new charges, extended detention, were already accepted internally. This was not his first institutional consequence. It would not be his last. In the minutes following the assault, rumors spread faster than reports. Inmates would later recount what they thought had happened. Some exaggerated. Some minimized. But everyone agreed on one thing: it started with food. Correction officers completed use of force paperwork. Incident logs were filled with neutral language. Inmate-on-inmate altercation. Improvised weapon. No prior warning indicators. Those words mattered. They shaped accountability. What the reports did not capture was the atmosphere that followed. Back in the housing units, inmates were locked in their cells for hours. Meals were delayed. Some were cancelled entirely. Hunger compounded fear. Tension climbed. Lockdowns at Rikers often punished entire units for individual actions. It was efficient. It was indiscriminate. And it reinforced the same scarcity that had triggered the violence in the first place. Inside cells, men replayed the incident in their minds. Not out of empathy, but calculation. Who was involved? Who had commissary? Who had enemies? Who might be next? Violence at Rikers rarely stayed isolated. The mess hall itself remained closed for inspection. Officers photographed tables, floors, tray racks. The improvised weapon was logged as contraband. Another entry in a long list of makeshift tools created from everyday objects. Plastic trays. Utensils. Broom handles. The system created the materials, then blamed the inmates for using them. Administrators reviewed surveillance footage. From above, the assault looked sudden and unprovoked. 2 bodies moved. Others stepped back. Officers intervened. End of story. From the ground level, it had been inevitable. In the hours after the incident, correction officers rotated shifts. New staff arrived, already briefed, already desensitized. For them, this was not a crisis. It was a known risk realized. For inmates, it was confirmation. Confirmation that food scarcity still ruled daily life. That eating well made you visible. That hunger made you dangerous. That the system would respond only after blood was drawn. The injured inmate was relocated to a different housing area upon return from medical care. His commissary access was restricted temporarily. His movement was limited. His safety was uncertain. Victims at Rikers often paid twice, once during the assault, and again afterward. The attacker was placed in segregation. Alone. Lights on. Time suspended. The punishment was severe but familiar. Segregation was designed to deter, but inside Rikers it often hardened behavior instead. Hunger followed him there too. For days afterward, the mess hall carried a residue of tension. Inmates returned cautiously. Seating patterns shifted. Eyes stayed down. Trays were eaten faster. No one lingered anymore. The unspoken rule had been reinforced. Food was not neutral. Correction officers increased their presence temporarily. More eyes. More radios. But structure did not change. Portions remained inconsistent. Commissary still divided the population. Hunger remained constant. And so did the risk. This incident would later be cited quietly, folded into statistics, referenced in oversight discussions, mentioned in passing during broader critiques of Rikers Island. It would not dominate headlines. It would not spark immediate reform. But for the men who stood in that mess hall, it became a marker. A reminder that violence at Rikers was not random. It followed patterns. It followed deprivation. It followed neglect. And it always followed hunger. When the doors finally reopened and routine resumed, nothing fundamental had changed. The system had absorbed the shock and moved on. The inmates had not. Because at Rikers Island, the aftermath of violence does not fade with cleanup crews and paperwork. It lingers. In who eats quickly. In who eats slowly. In who watches the room. And in who knows that the next incident will begin the same way. Quietly. Over food.